All right, back on the horse. Okay, we're gonna. This is in the same vein as the one I did, I think is yesterday, about the Venezuelans, about the demographic problem. This is another similar story, and this is right along with the same vein that we were talking about because I want you guys to understand why governments do certain things. They don't just do things willy nilly, even though it looks like it's willy nilly. So it looks like a government is doing something absolutely stupid. It really does. And no government that has a whole bunch of smart people that are educated, that have all these high fancy degrees with all this experience, will keep doing the same thing over and over again because it's stupid. They don't do that. There's a reason that they do it. And sometimes they'll pretend like they're stupid, like their brain did, but they're actually not. No government over time will do something insane without a very good reason. It's just we don't like the reason that they do it. But anyway, this is, I think it's from 538. How low can America's birth rate go before it's a problem? The U.S. fertility rate hit a record low in 2020, just as it did in 2019 and 2018. Although the COVID-19 pandemic seems to have accelerated this decline, the drop has been underway for years. The total fertility rate, the average number of children a woman is expected to have over her lifetime, now sits at 1.64 children per woman in the United States. Not only is it the lowest rate recorded since the government began tracking these stats in the 1930s, but it is well below the so-called replacement level fertility of about 2.1. The latter number is what social scientists and policymakers have long regarded as the rate a country should maintain to keep population numbers stable. When the fertility rate falls below replacement level, the population grows older and shrinks, which can slow economic growth and strain government budgets. Today's babies are tomorrow's workers and taxpayers. They'll not only staff hospitals and nursing homes we'll use in old age, but also sustain the economy by funding our pensions when we retire, paying the taxes that finance Social Security, Medicare, and many other government programs we rely on, and buying the homes and stocks we've invested in to build our savings. But recently, some experts have questioned whether we ought to be so concerned about low fertility. There's nothing really magical about replacement level fertility, said Eric Stresnick, a professor of demography and sustainable development at the University of Vienna. There are ways to overcome the challenges of low fertility, but it'll take an investment in people who have been born already. Replacement level fertility is a convenient but unrealistic idea. The concept of replacement level fertility goes back to at least 1929. At the time, birth rates in the U.S. and other industrialized countries had been falling for decades, and people didn't know why. Attempting to explain this phenomenon, the American demographer Warren Thompson theorized that these countries industrialized. People gained access to better medicine and sanitation as well as safer drinking water, leading to a sharp drop in death rates. With more children surviving to adulthood, people eventually started having fewer kids. In the final stage of this demographic transition, Thompson proposed that the fertility rate would settle at just about replacement level, with one baby born for every adult dying. Thompson's prediction was purely theoretical, but it became foundational to the field of demography. When the United Nations Population Division began projecting world population in the 1960s, its estimates were based on Thompson's assumption that fertility rates across the world would converge to replacement level, further cementing the concept into demographic thought. This idea was attractive to politicians and policymakers since it meant that they wouldn't have to worry about populations growing and shrinking indefinitely. They could count on new generations of workers and taxpayers to keep the economy humming, and government programs funded when older people stopped working. As it turned out, Thompson was only partially correct. Birth rates do decline as countries industrialize, but they don't stop falling when they reach replacement level. In fact, fertility rates are now below replacement level in every post-industrial society, and it's not clear where they'll settle. But just because America's fertility rate isn't going to return to the 2.1 number anytime soon doesn't mean that the fabric of society is going to collapse. In fact, low fertility poses some advantages, easing ecological pressures, preventing overcrowding, and reducing the infrastructure costs that come with a growing population. Policy solutions may be able to address the falling rate. The fabric of society will be tested, though. Low fertility poses some serious economic challenges. Already, the share of Americans 65 and older is expected to rise from about 17% today to 23% by 2060. America's declining fertility rate threatens to accelerate this trend. Many policymakers fear the ballooning population of older adults will overburden the nation's dwindling workforce. But some demographers think it's silly to compare the workforce of today with the workforce of, say, 40 years from now. The next generation of workers may constitute a smaller slice of the population, but they'll be more educated and thus more productive and be better poised to satisfy the needs of older people. In which case, some demographers argue there's no reason to assume that below replacement fertility is a problem. Future generations have broader shoulders in the sense that they're capable of supporting more dependents, said Stresnick. According to his calculations, the fertility rate could fall to 1.5 before the cost of aging becomes a problem. And of course, there are ways to encourage more adults to work. In the U.S. and many other nations, women are less likely than men to be employed. If what we need is more workers and taxpayers, plenty of women may happily rise to the occasions if employers make it worth their while. That's probably why they started employing more women, because there were less men. Just a thought. Taken together, these findings suggest that we could ease the problems of low fertility society if we're willing to invest in children's education and support women in the workforce. One analysis found that if the European Union eliminated disparities in education and labor force participation, the projected decline in the size of the labor force would be cut by more than half. Another analysis found that if EU countries match the levels of education, labor force participation currently observed in Sweden, the relative strength of the labor force would actually improve in many nations over the coming decades. Some experts are skeptical, though, that having better educated workers will be enough to overcome the challenges of low fertility. Educated workers are more productive than less educated workers in many jobs, but I'm not sure they're more productive as parents or caregivers for the elderly. Nancy Folbre, professor emerita of economics at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. What happens if too many educated workers want to be physicists rather than hospice workers? Others point out that the problems of low fertility may get thornier when the overall size of the population begins to shrink. What happens to mortgages in a country where real estate depreciates like a used car because the population is falling, and we need fewer and fewer houses all the time? We're totally unprepared for that, said Lyman Stone, a demographer and research fellow for the Institute for Family Studies, a conservative-leaning think tank. And given enough time, said Dr. Christopher Murray, the director for the Institute of Health Metrics and Evaluation at the University of Washington, below replacement fertility leads to the extinction of the human race. Eventually, you run into a problem. It's not sustainable. Since no country has had low fertility rates long enough to experience its full effects, the debate over all this remains theoretical. It takes a while to work its way through the population, said Murray. Even countries like Japan, where the population is shrinking, still benefit from a growing global workforce from which to draw workers. That's the key. A growing global marketplace in which to sell their wares. And countries like the U.S., Canada, and Australia rely on net immigration as well. That's the key. That's what they're doing with the borders. You think that it's not planned, and it is, and could probably continue doing so for decades if they choose to embrace it. But birth rates are falling practically everywhere, and the global fertility rate is expected to fall below replacement levels sometime between 2050 and 2100. Only the continent of Africa is actually holding up the global fertility rates because they have 5 times the rate of everybody else. The consequences of low fertility will be different when the whole world is experiencing it. That's what they want. If everybody declines at the same time, they don't mind that. What we do know, however, is that the differing perspectives on this issue leaves us with 2 broad approaches to handling the challenges of low fertility. We can encourage people to have more children by enacting policies that make parenting more attainable, or we can invest more in the people we've already got, both children and their parents, so everyone becomes a productive, capable adult. The good news is many of the policies that help with the latter approach can also help with the former. Policies that support mothers in the workforce ensure that all children have access to good upbringing and education. For example, paid parental leave, child allowances, and expanding access to high-quality child care, early childhood education, and higher education. also ease the financial strain of parenting. So although we don't know exactly how far the fertility rate can fall before it becomes a problem, the solutions may be more straightforward than we think. In other words, if you think what's going on with women in as far as the child care, parental leave, all that kind of stuff that supports single mothers is going away, not. But I just wanted to read that because you think that I'm saying all this stuff and it doesn't mean anything. I'm saying pulling all this stuff out of my ass, right? And I'm not. Immigration is there for a very good reason. Europe is already doing it. Europe is actually doing it more than we are. Europe just doesn't complain about it because they let their population know exactly what they're doing. In other words, they're transparent about why immigrants come into their country. That's how come there's no big deal. That's how come there's no immigration hate, because their governments don't lie to them about immigration. In the United States, instead of having a cogent immigration policy, our politicians would rather give us slogans and rile everybody up and talk about building walls and stuff like that, even though we know the doggone wall is not going to keep people out. Everybody knows that. That's how come Trump never minded them building a doggone wall. They didn't mind building a wall because they know that the people on the other side will figure out how to either dig under it or climb over it. And they did. You had people climbing 25-foot walls or cutting holes through fences. You can't keep smart people out. Human beings are very smart people. Simple things like walls and fences are not going to keep them out. They're going to figure out a way through. And the U.S. government knows that. If U.S. government doesn't want people in, they don't even need a wall. They got all kind of drones and blimps and radar. They can see people coming for hundreds of miles. If they really wanted to police the border, they can police countries 10,000 miles away. You know doggone well they can police a border that's right there, right down the street, right in their own backyard. Don't tell me that. The Canadian border, you cross one of those rivers, and Canada has less than a tenth of the size of the U.S. population. And the Canadian border is much wider than the Mexican border. You cross the Canadian border without permission from across that river, the Canadians are on you like white on rice. You cannot cross the Canadian border without them knowing about it. And that's Canada. With the U.S., they can put down all kind of sensors to let them know when people cross their border, if that's what they really wanted. They're encouraging these people to come through here because they want cheap labor. Before it was just cheap labor, keep the wages from rising. Now they need replacement workers because the fertility rate is so low. Eventually, when the machines come online, they're going to push all those people out. The last time we had an economic dislocation, you didn't have to kick them out. They were leaving because they didn't have any jobs. Nobody's going to stay in the United States and starve. They'd rather go home with their families and starve. They're coming here because there's work. If there wasn't any work, they wouldn't be here. If the United States was not going to support them, they wouldn't be here. They're not going to stay here and starve. Stop being stupid. People and governments do things for a reason. Trump did not slow down immigration. He never did. In fact, Obama had a lower net immigration than Trump ever did in his 4 years. That's a fact. Besides Eisenhower, Obama deported more immigrants than anybody else. Why? Because there wasn't any jobs for them. When there are no jobs, they will deport people. And like I said, you just lost probably, if just without COVID, without COVID, you lose anywhere from a little over 1 million people, a year, because you have babies that are born to replace it. More than enough babies born to replace it. Plus your net immigration. You just lost 600,000 people, 700,000 people. And the COVID-related deaths, when deaths of despair, probably went up another 200,000-300,000 people. So you lost a million people more than normal just with COVID. They're going to replace those people. And the Venezuelans that are coming here are already educated. You don't have to educate them. You don't have to teach them. They're not the poor peasants that you see coming out of Guatemala or Mexico that walked. The Venezuelans are actually educated people. They're not dumb. They've already been schooled. Those are the elite class that are coming here escaping, the turmoil of Venezuela. You're going to have to start thinking, people. Anyway, I just wanted to read that. Don't want to make this too long because I know how you guys are. You know what? In the comments section, I probably would much rather just highlight stuff and skim it and have you guys read it rather than read the whole article. But I know y'all ain't gonna read the whole article. That's how come I read them. So anybody that gets tired of me reading this stuff, hey, if you guys would just read the link and read the article instead of depending on me to answer every question, because I know if I don't read the article, you guys go already ask me every question that's already in the article, which is why I read the whole thing. I know some people don't like me reading it, but that's why I read it. That's why I read the whole thing. Anyway, I'm going to jump off here. This is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.